All right, thank you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the talk. We're going to be twos up today, so I'm going to be presenting from Lightdash. I'm going to be talking about how Workday built AI-powered enterprise analytics with Lightdash and dbt, and there's going to be a big focus on the how, because I know people are really interested in doing this internally too. So, at Lightdash, we're thinking about how do we build AI agents that enable people to, query their data with a much lower barrier to entry. But I've also noticed a lot of teams are also trying to do this internally. So I want to kind of like open the box a little bit on how we did this. And Mike's going to be sharing a little on like how they apply that at Workday. Maybe just some really quick intro. If you don't know Lightdash, Lightdash is a business intelligence tool. It's open source, like dbt, and it's entirely configured from within dbt. So if you have a dbt project, you can go to the Lightdash GitHub repo, you can spin up a full BI stack and just stick it straight on dbt, and you kind of bootstrap an enterprise BI platform from your dbt project. I'll hand over to Mike to do his own intro.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Moone at Workday. So fun fact, Oliver and I actually were both formerly, well, he's still a YC founder. I was formerly a YC founder, went back to the enterprise space, but I've been on both sides of it, kind of seeing how startups operate, how big companies operate like Workday. So a lot of you, does anyone here use Workday? All right, sweet. So yeah, it's very commonly used, especially across big companies, right? I think that's something Workday did really well early on, is like they went after the biggest Fortune 500 companies as their initial customer base, which is hard, right? Think about a startup, you're usually going after other startups. Workday did like the totally opposite thing, and is super successful in it. And they have over 60% of the Fortune 500 using it. We just became a Fortune 500 company, became an S&P 500 listed company, which are really cool milestones for Workday. We've been around for a long time, so we actually just celebrated our 20th anniversary as a company. We've grown a lot over that time. As you can imagine, with that growth comes a lot of data as well. So we manage a tremendous amount of data internally, things that we use to monitor the health of all of our infrastructure. As part of kind of meeting this growth scale, we've moved from only operating out of private data centers to cloud accounts too on AWS and GCP, and we have a multi-cloud strategy. And that's kind of put a little bit more emphasis on how we present our data and control that semantic layer. So I'll touch on that part of it as I get into my elements of the talk. But for now, Oliver, kind of what are some of the data challenges you're seeing across all kinds of companies?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious who has one of these in their team. So this is a data request channel. This is something we see at like all scales, and it's actually kind of a great solution. I would say like all the best data teams that we work with end up having something like this to field requests that people aren't getting from self-service around their tools. Workday actually has awesome self-service like across the org. But like depending on where your self-service kind of journey is at, you might see these, and some of these questions are like reasonable, some of them are kind of wild, some are super vague, and they're like surprisingly time-consuming. And so we think a lot about, we're on the self-serve track here, and when I think about self-serve, I'm often thinking, how do we take the subset of these questions that should be answerable by the end user and not by someone on the data team? Like it doesn't create a data ticket. And at Lightdash, we often talk about like cooking food. And like for a lot, sometimes you want to go to the chef to get a good meal. You need that if you want, I don't know, a souffle or something, a beef bourguignon. I don't know what you're into. But a lot of the time you've got to cook at home as well. And the problem with a lot of data teams is they go to the chefs, for like a cheese sandwich. And so the idea is like, you can make a cheese sandwich at home. And so a lot of what we think about Lightdash in the BI layer is like, how do we make self-serve way easier? Like most teams basically see this as like the hellhole, like this is such a time consumer. And so we think often about how do we get rid of it. This is a symptom of basically a missing self-serve experience. And so I just wanted a really quick crash course on the semantic layer. Katie from Lightdash did a great talk on this last year. So I'm just going to like smash through it because it's kind of a prerequisite for a lot of what we talk about today. So if people aren't familiar with the semantic layer, it's essentially a way to map the way that you talk about metrics in your business to the underlying technology. So it's agnostic of the warehouse you use or the exact SQL that you write or the exact aggregation that you do. You define things like revenue or churn, and then the technology and the queries and the stack that powers that is then abstracted away. And the idea is that someone can say, give me revenue by date, give me revenue by geography, give me revenue by salesperson, and it shouldn't matter like how it's computed. They only care about getting the right answer. So yeah, here's where it sits. You've got your your data layer underneath here, your warehouse. We stick a semantic layer on top, and then we connect up all of our tools to that semantic layer, which enables governance and allows people to kind of query from these predefined metrics. And so your experience ends up looking something like this. You, instead of writing raw SQL, which is something we don't expect our end users to do to self-serve, they can actually just go to a catalog of metrics. This is a screenshot from Lightdash. And they can just say, OK, show me the basket total or the average item profit. I don't know if anyone here knows the SQL, like the ground truth SQL for computing revenue at your company. It's probably very complex. So this is something that gets basically saved into the semantic layer. But we actually, even with a semantic layer, we still see these data requests coming through. We think the reason for that has been, and what we've seen at Lightdash, is that even asking a question of the semantic layer, like let me pick a metric, you have to kind of take a problem that you have, let's say like, oh, I want to figure out which sales team is underperforming this quarter, or I want to figure out like which features are getting the stickiest, or which features people are churning off. And to take that concept as someone who's not in data and say, oh, I know I need to fetch this metric and split it this way, is actually still not perfect. This is better, and we find that people that adopt Lightdash have way fewer of these data requests, but it's still not perfect. And so there's an open question here for us recently was, how do we take these like natural language questions and structure them into a semantic layer query? Like, how do you take an idea somebody has and say, OK, you need to get this metric? And this becomes so hard as you scale, and your company has thousands of metrics. Some are relevant to some teams, some are relevant to others. So this does kind of smell like a job for LLMs, which is kind of what we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about how we use them to power self-serve. But before I do that, I kind of want to pop back over to Mike to talk about why the semantic layer is so important at the scale that Workday is operating at.
Yeah. So at Workday, over the years, we've built a lot of tools internally that can run SQL queries and give folks self-service. But one thing that changed is when we moved to the cloud, the answers we were trying to get became a lot more cost sensitive. So if you've ever run your own AWS or GCP account, you know how easy it is to run up big bills if you're not careful. And think about multiplying that across all the service teams that build a piece of Workday's architecture. When you have like a fixed hardware like your laptop, you're not really thinking that much about what's running in the background. Does it need to be running right now, right? Otherwise, you'd be like constantly closing things. So a lot of the Workday architecture was originally built around running in our private data centers. When we move those to the cloud, now it matters how long it's running, how much memory it's requesting, right? Does it need all that memory? Can we scale it up? Can we scale it down? And we have to give visibility into lots of internal folks across the company who are in charge of how that service runs and the architecture for it, but they don't necessarily understand the cost impacts of that. So that's where we brought in dbt and Lightdash so that we could create a consistent transformation layer on getting all that raw data from AWS, all that raw data from Google Cloud on the billing side, combining it with information coming from our data centers to create these really intelligent views that help these teams manage the costs of their infrastructure. Another thing that we did as part of this, because again, the semantic layer is very important, we'll predefine it for a lot of these models, a lot of this analysis, because we're not expecting folks to necessarily understand how to join billing data on their own, because it's completely abstracted away from them, is we needed a really good framework for doing this. We actually started out with a framework primarily around macros, where we'd basically create these macros that would construct your models, and you'd pass it arguments, and then it would build your SQL. But I don't know if you've noticed in the dbt docs, there's actually a section that says if your models basically are just a macro, you've probably gone too far. And that's kind of where we were. We realized that we were using Jinja, I think, for more than it was intended to be used. There was a lot of logic in there, a lot of transformations, and not just templating, but almost treating it like a programming language. And at the end of the day, I think if you look at dbt at a high level, you have these SQL files, you have these YAML files, and they all parse down to this manifest. This big JSON file that's like the state of your project. So we developed a framework internally that kind of flips that data flow. And so instead of writing the SQL and a matching YAML, you actually write a validated JSON configuration, and then we'll auto-generate the SQL and the matching YAML for that. It's intentionally opinionated, a little bit restrictive. It's not intended kind of for every single use case, but it works well internally at Workday because we do want to enforce a few things. One is we want to make sure the semantic layer is always there and that it matches the SQL. Like if you've created API docs, you know that sometimes it can be a challenge to keep your documentation up to date with what the API actually does, right? So having them generate it together helps ensure they stay consistent. We actually recently just open sourced this extension as well. It's something that I think is just like 3 days ago we made the repo public. But we think this could be potentially beneficial to the broader community, again, as an opinionated framework that enforces certain things in your DBT project. So I'm actually going to tempt the demo gods and flip out of the presentation real quick to show you a little bit of what that looks like in practice. So one thing that we do is, as part of this extension, we actually enforce the project structure. So if you've gone through the DBT best practice docs, you'll know they talk about intermediate layer, staging layer, mart layer. When you define a JSON schema for your model, it'll move the file and put it into the corresponding folder. So you can't actually have it in a folder that doesn't align with that layer. The other thing we do is we'll automatically generate the SQL and the YAML. So if you want to see what the SQL looks like, you can flip over to the SQL side. If you want to see what the YAML looks like, you can flip over to the YAML side. If, let's say, we want to add some context to this for an LLM. So I'm going to add an AI hint and say, if user is hungry, use this field. Because these products, it's food, right? I think, Oliver was saying we have an affinity for food, and so we decided to keep that going in the example here. So you see I added that AI hint. It automatically populated it down here on the YAML. It also figured out where this is inherited downstream and pulled that forward through the intermediate layer, pulled it into the two mart layers that are referencing that same field. One other extension we use internally within Workday is the power user extension, and I think some of the ultimate AI folks are here as well. So if you look at their lineage, number one is it has a lot more information now about what columns exist because, again, we've ensured there's a semantic layer YAML file that matches every model. You can even flip over and see the Lightdash semantic layer on it as well, because by predefining these metrics, these dimensions that we're ultimately going to expose, they can kind of live alongside the models all the way through the lineage up until the point where they get deployed and visualized within Lightdash. So that's a little bit of what we've done internally to take a super opinionated approach on enforcing the semantic layer for all of our DBT models that we generate. So now I'm going to flip back to the presentation. Demo gods were kind today. Oliver, so how does this go into building an AI analyst that actually you can visualize within the Lightdash side?
Yeah, so the semantic layer is such an important starting point for generating all that context that the agents need. One thing that's happened a lot over the last 12 months is the foundational models in AI have become so good that a lot of the times the issues that we run into with things like hallucinations or getting a wrong answer is more of a context engineering problem. That the model just didn't have the information it needed at runtime in order to do that. And the semantic layer is such a rich source, and your DBT project is such a rich source of metadata. And so it's really cool to see how Workday manages that at such an extreme scale. I'm kind of interested, who's seen an AI BI demo before? Has anyone seen text to SQL? Okay, nice. Maybe this is how it went, so I vibe coded this last night. Good morning, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please could you provide me with the sum of revenue grouped by category, filtered to the transactions where this happens. This is usually how these demos go. It's an extremely precise question, and the AI says, I'd be delighted to help you with this extremely accurate question. But in reality, in this data request channel, they're so much more vague. People maybe refer to some conversations that have happened outside of the channel, or they refer to some metric that it's kind of unclear, or maybe they don't even know what kind of question they need to ask. I think the best kind of data analysts, if there's anyone here who's done it, they help coach people into asking the right question. And it doesn't matter if it's a human or an AI, but if you pose the wrong question, you're usually going to get a wrong answer. So one thing that we discovered was a big challenge of building an AI agent for data analytics is that it needed to help the end users to actually formulate their question well and kind of coach them through it. So for example, if in Slack I said, hey, what's our conversion rate in the data request channel? This would be a terrible answer from someone on the data team. It's 23.7%. What do you mean? Anyone would say, what conversion rate are you talking about? Over what time period? And those kind of things. And all the best data analysts that I've worked with will always follow up with these kinds of questions. So if the CEO comes in and says, hey, what's the conversion rate? I have a meeting in a minute. They're going to follow up quickly. Can you analyze which features drive retention? Yeah, why don't I spend 6 hours working on that dashboard for you? Or it might have been better to serve the feature adoption dashboard that we already have. And what about this case, where somebody asks for why the numbers are different in 2 different places? The data analyst is going to think that. That would infuriate me if I got this. But a good data analyst would look back at the documentation, the semantic layer, and figure out like what went wrong there and how do we create that single source of truth. These are like all traits that elite data analysts, they kind of differentiate like a great data analyst on a team from a more simple one. And these were all traits that we wanted to bake in to Lightdash's AI analyst. You know, if we're really going to take that data request channel that at some point I showed as like a flaming hell, if we're going to actually automate that, then it needs to be able to answer those kinds of questions and deal with the style and the types of questions that we really see in the wild. I think if we created AI analysts that were very scoped down to well-defined questions, we're really not going to make that much progress. So yeah, this is actually the kind of roughly the architecture for how Lightdash's AI works. And I'll just really quickly talk through each of the components before I show a demo of it, because they all talk to a lot of those traits that I think a great AI analyst has. So the first bit, which Mike showed, is that the semantic layer generates all the SQL. The model doesn't write SQL itself. All the joins and the aggregations are predefined in the semantic layer. So, and maybe another thing to add there is also the governance, like who can access which metrics, which rows are they allowed to see, which columns are they allowed to see. All of that security and governance and permissions that you expect in your BI tool and in your semantic layer is handled deterministically. That's not AI. We don't want permissions to be handled by AI. We want them to be hard and fast rules. So the model can actually query the semantic layer for those governed metrics. And we actually see the semantic layer as like a source of memory. If the AI needed to improve the definition of what total revenue is, that would get written back to the semantic layer for all the other tools to consume. In addition to that, we found these other 2 memory kernels are really useful for powering AI agents. So the agent has its own memory that's shared between everybody that talks to it, which might be something about the context that it's used in. Maybe the team uses CAC as an acronym for X or Y. And then we also build a user profile for every single person that interacts with the agent, because what we find is if you have 10,000 metrics, each individual self-serve consumer tends to ask for like 3 or 4 of them. So that helps them build like their own profile with the agent. We provide a bunch of prompts and instructions to encourage the LLM to coach the end user through their question, not to give them like sudden answers, and also to prefer existing content over new content. And you can see at the top I added this kernel at the top here, which allows us to use augmented retrieval for existing content. So if you ask a question and there's already a dashboard or someone on the data team already made that, they can drill into it. Okay, so does it work? How did it work? I'm going to show a couple of demos of some conversations I did. This is what I do late night in my hotel room. So there we go. How many orders do we have from that ranch partner since Black Friday? So this is very vague. Like, I didn't know the exact partner name. I didn't give an exact date. But the model was able to, this is going to stop really quickly, isn't it? Let's pause it. Oops, sorry. There we go. I can't do it with the clicker. And so what it's done is it's actually taken like, oh, okay, it knows that Black Friday was last year. And it's funny because at Lightdash we spend so much time on the UI for a date picker component. I think every SaaS tool does, because you want to make it easy for people to like ask questions with this like broad range of like, give me a date from like my second daughter's first birthday through to this other one. And like the LLMs have just made that so much easier. And it's also able to like walk through the data in the semantic layer. So it also figured out that the partner was Redwood Ranch. So the end user didn't know the exact name, but it was able to do that. And that's super powerful. So it can kind of handle those kind of vague questions. But it can also, let's see what's going to, I've asked for a dashboard here. So just, hey, can you follow up and just give me a dashboard that I can share with that partner, because I'm about to have a call with them. And it can actually go through and it can grab all of the underlying related metrics and produce a dashboard. In this case, it was really simple. But just to remind you that behind the AI analyst that we built is a kind of full BI tool. So you can take those generated results, you can save them, and you can publish a dashboard that anybody can see. And so this is maybe like a more traditional BI view that you'd be used to that has like all the bells and whistles that you'd want to see. In this example, I'm asking, what's the main KPI dashboard? So again, trying to keep it vague. When I demo, I once, someone in the room here, I demoed recently to them, and I just put money, question mark. And it was like, do you want to know about finance? Do you want to know about revenue? But here, it's found 3 dashboards that are called KPI dashboard, and it's told me that the KPI dashboard is the main one that I should look at. And for the purpose of the demo, I said, how do you know that? And this is all metadata that's like so rich that we can make available to the AI. It knew that it has the most views, so it had 30K views, and that also it didn't say like copy of, and also the permissions were like shared with everybody. These are all traits. And also, again, I mentioned a lot of the requests we get in the data request channel are simple. They're just time consuming. And two great traits about these automated agents is one is they actually read the docs. They will read any docs that you feed to them. It might forget them if you feed in too many, but it will read them, which a human won't necessarily do. And they also don't get tired of like repeatedly searching for fields and content and just doing that in a loop. And we find that the agents do that really successfully. So here we'll happily look at all the dashboards and open them up, see who's looked at them, and is it someone on the data team who creates a lot of approved content? These would all be green flags for like serving that. And here I'm just asking about everything that's on the dashboard, which was a bit extreme because it was a huge dashboard. But it can walk through all of that. Okay, cool. The last thing I want to show is something that we've launched really recently that we call the self-improving semantic layer. So one tricky thing that we found, let me go back, when people start using it is they actually realize their semantic layer maybe was out of date somewhere. Maybe a description of a field wasn't quite correct. So give me a second, I'm just trying to go backwards here. And when you're in the context of the analyst, especially as a data user, you know what the answer should be. Okay, skip over this one. And so here I'm saying, how many unique visitors did we get to our marketing page so far this quarter? Now, this was a trick because I know that there's no metric called unique visitors in our semantic layer. So it's gone in and it's searching for relevant fields. It's going to create a result for me. And this is a feature that we recently launched that you can enable only for certain people on the data team, is it will actually make updates to your semantic layer with your approval. So here it's noticed, it noticed that there's no unique visitors metric, but there is something called anonymous device count, and that looks like a great proxy for answering that question. And so it made the suggestion, hey, look, I've created this content for you. I recommend we update the description to say, this is used as an approximation for unique visitors on the site. So you really enter this loop where every interaction that you have with the agent also improves the underlying semantic layer, making every question better afterwards. So yeah, this is just in beta now, so if you want to try it out, you should take a look. It's really exciting, and it's changing very quickly. And around this, we have a lot of governance about how do you take all those changes that AI is making and put them through a review process and make sure that it's committed back. Okay, last one. This was actually kind of a surprise to us. It turns out the foundational models are amazing at translation. You might already know this. So we have companies like around the globe, and in particular, we have a customer in Japan who have just basically rolled this out because it handles translation so well. So here I just asked, the semantic layer is all in English. The Queen's English, of course. And here I'm asking in Japanese, how many orders do we have a month? It was a very simple request. But you can see here that even though all of my semantic layer is in English, the foundational models just have the ability. And it's just the amazing power of building an agentic kind of product is that you get to harness that underlying power for really cool workflows. And there's so many unexpected workflows we kind of still haven't discovered. Yeah, Mike, maybe I'll hand it over for you to close out on this.
Yeah, so I want to close out. So I love tying a lot of things back to self-driving cars. And so I actually asked Gemini to generate this image of a robot driving a car looking at a map. And it's perfect because it's kind of driving over the line, right? It's not like seeing anything on the road. And, and I think that the point I like to try to make is, as humans, we should own the rules, right? And so you think about the rules of the road, like drive on the left side or the right side of the road. Don't drive on this sidewalk, stick to the street, right? These are things that humans define, and that gives us confidence that now we can let people go drive. The same way that we could give confidence that eventually agents could drive themselves, right? Self-driving cars. And it's not always a technical limitation, right? I mean, you listen to Elon Musk, like self-driving cars were a solved problem a long time ago, but it's not, and it's not necessarily all because of the technology. It's because of the safety elements, right? And if you think about deploying AI agents inside of a company like Workday, that's, they're a big company, conservative, a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Like if we don't have guardrails around that, there's just no chance. And it's not a technology problem, right? It's a safety problem, it's a rule problem, it's a governance problem. So the semantic layer, in our view, becomes absolutely critical to letting agents do work, is because we can define the rules, the guardrails that they can work within, and then they can do their thing. But if you don't have that, you don't have a good understanding or control over that, it's going to be a huge adoption to actually being able to benefit from these agents in practice. So in our view, semantic layer is the key. It's more important than people think. It's worth investing in it. It's worth spending the time to craft the semantic layer. It's going to help your humans, your data analysts. It's also going to help your agents, and it'll let them do work in a safe way within the company.
Awesome. Yeah, Mike and I will be hanging out afterwards. If you want to talk about building with AI, consuming AI, self-serve, we'd love to chat. But I think we have a few minutes left, so we could take a couple of questions if anybody has one. Yeah.
Is there a block for your vision and your opinions on why you went from JSON to JSON, and how you come up with that extension? Do you have a block as to why that vision was created in the first place, or any articles?
There's not, but there probably should be. That's a good idea. I'm like, I love building things. I'm fairly technical. It's why I started a company, went through YC, but I often forget after we build it, we should probably tell people that we built it and talk about it and explain why. So that's a good suggestion. I think coming out of this, I'll take that action to write an article and create a post about it. For now, we just kind of reserve it for conferences like this. Yeah, good question. So it's not available in the marketplace yet. We open sourced the repo. We're calling it DJ, which is short for DBT JSON. So it's basically using JSON to generate valid DBT syntax, including the semantic layer.
Is there a process of self-reinforcement to improve the answers?
Yeah, so the question was, does the AI improve itself over time with answers? Yeah, so there's the purpose mostly of those different memory units that I showed are in order to do that, which is that if it's corrected over time, it can remember those by either writing back to the semantic layer, if it's something about a metric description, or if it can add a metric, or it can remember something about the user if it's more specific to them. And I think that depends a little bit on whether the person interacting with it is a professional who kind of knows the ground truth answer, so can coach the AI to improve itself, or if it's an end user where they don't know the ground truth answer, and actually they're getting more coached by the AI, and maybe they're explaining their business domain to the user. So it can, but I think sometimes we have to put that a bit. So for example, in Lightdash, we have two different experiences. There's an agent you can talk to in order to improve your semantics and your metrics, and there's a separate one that's used purely for consumption.
And Lightdash actually has a really cool feature called evaluations. And so we're building these FinOps agents within Workday that can understand opportunities to optimize public cloud cost, right? Services that are running on Google Cloud, how could you optimize it? So we're giving it instructions and how to answer cost-related information. You can create these standard evaluations, which is basically a set of agent tests. And it's like, hey, repeat these prompts, repeat these prompts. And so as you evolve your kind of metadata layer with the hints and the context, as well as your instructions, you can basically do a regression test and say, did it get worse at answering these questions, or did it get better at answering these questions? And so, I mean, it's a really good question, right? But you almost, the same way you would have tests around software, you should probably have tests around the agent responses as well. And that's something that they're building in within Lightdash.
Awesome. Okay, look at that, perfect. Okay, cool, so we don't get in trouble, we'll stop, but
Well, will we get in trouble? We can probably take a couple more, right?
can we take a couple more questions? Oh, okay,
All right, we're
great.
good.
Along the same lines, you showed where you can accept or reject change the semantic model.
Yep.
Something that only some of your developer could have access to, is that something that you suggest maybe to your data team?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so the question was, that part where you accept or reject a change to the semantic layer, is it something you can scope only to the data team? Yeah, one thing we learned kind of building the AI in partnership with big companies is that we baked in a lot of permission, like a lot of granular permissions early on into the agent. So there's the foundational LLM, and then it has access to a bunch of tools, like can it search existing content, can it create queries, can it set up scheduled deliveries, is it allowed to email people, is it allowed to update the semantic layer? And you can control all of those depending on the user's role. And so our best practice, that's kind of flexible, but the best practice is to create one agent that has like a pretty broad set of tools that the data team can use to improve the semantic models.
Well, and the other thing I'll say is, and this is something that attracted us to DBT in the first place, is it's all source controlled. So it's all in a repo, and it goes in through a pull request, right? So same thing with an update that the agent proposes to the semantic layer, it still goes through a PR with approval process, right? And there's traceability, where it came from, you can change it before you accept it. So, I mean, that's a huge kind of win internally, right, for folks that need to understand, like, are we changing the underlying kind of context we're giving that's going to drive changes in answers, is being able to review and approve that. And you can decide, who the people are that can approve those pull requests before merging it in.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
That's like, when you have the accept, you really make the pull request, and then it's still all control that you get.
Oh, I see. So the question was, when you press accept, when it suggests a change to the semantic layer, does it open a pull request to the DBT project? We considered that, but it doesn't yet. It actually batches up changes. Because what we found was, in reality, people go through a phase of making a whole bunch of changes, and it was getting quite crazy if people had a big CI/CD process. There was like 100 PRs, because people just noticed 100 descriptions are out of date. We had that internally. The first time I demoed this for our own, so we dog food Lightdash very heavily at Lightdash, and I said, what's our revenue? And it like just crapped out. I was like, I don't know, there is no revenue metric, which made no sense, because I knew we had a revenue dashboard. And it turned out in our semantic layer we use internally, no metric was called revenue. It was called like Stripe monthly payment sum or something ridiculous. So the first thing I ever did, this was before we had the self-improving part, as we said, there was a problem here. It needs to be able to update those as you discover it in the conversations. So yeah, we batch up all of the changes into one pull request, and you submit that through the Lightdash UI. So it will say you've got a change set, and they can also be per user. So if you were using it personally, you might make 10 changes, and then you'll have a pull request, and you just say, now I want to submit it, and push it up. So you effectively work on a branch when you go back and forth with the agent on semantic layer changes. Yeah.
But it ultimately goes to a PR before getting deployed to production.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that's how you share it with everybody.
Like a always-on kind of junior analyst who's surfacing, sudden changes, spikes, and drops, various APIs, and alerting folks.
Yeah, depending on, you mean, for example, if something, the agent's getting a lot of questions of a certain type?
No, like actually kind of surfacing insights that in your call metric suddenly spikes more than 10% week over week.
Yeah.
Right.
Just flagging up, anomalous changes.
So, I mean, I can touch on that. I mean, there's built-in metric alerts that you can build within Lightdash, and you can subscribe them to Slack channels. So, one thing we do is for a lot of our kind of key data sets, like we'll flag alerts if the data starts falling behind, because it means there's like some delay in the ingestion layer, right? And so we want to know about that first before our users do. So that's like a common thing we have across the board, is like check the recency of it. Because DBT doesn't it starts at the source, right? But something else is populating the source. Although now with the Fivetran merger, there's probably DBT's can get a little more opinionated about the source ingestion part. But that's a really good example of an alert that we use internally at Workday. I think the other thing that we're planning within Workday is these agents, you can call them through the UI. you can also call them through the MCP server layer directly, right? And so we plan to start building even smarter alerts with like scheduled prompts to the MCP server and asking questions. Again, once we dial in and we're comfortable with the responses, like you don't have to wait for a human to ask it. You can ask it to look for things on a schedule and start proactively pushing out these LLM-generated alerts as well. All right.
I'm getting a big wave at the
There
back,
we go.
which means
We're
we're in
good.
trouble. Thank you everyone so much for coming.
Thank you.